My wife and I recently moved out of a home that I can only describe as fucked up. The house caused so much anger and hatred. Whatever entity resides in the home is either menacing or pure evil. Even as soon as my wife moved into the home when she was a child, she told me a story of when she and her little brother were playing one night in his room. They were playing with a leapfrog-type device. She described in detail about how she was showing her brother how to use it, and it began to act strange. Strange sounds came out of it. And then a man's voice began screaming from it. She said it was saying something about a list, something about making mistakes. Screaming and cursing until she turned it off. So let's fast forward some. I met my wife a few years ago, and needless to say, she got knocked up. Anyway, we decided that since it was the logical thing to do, I would move in with her. Sweet, no problem. At the time I worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. This will come up later. After a few weeks of moving in, I noticed something strange about the house. The upstairs where we lived seemed menacing in a way. Like someone was in the other room waiting for you. At first I brushed it off as just being nervous. New house, new life kind of thing. I also thought it was from the pretty much steady insomnia work was causing me. As time went on, I began noticing more and more. Whenever the house should have been dead silent, things would happen. Footsteps up and down the hallways, knocks on doors, and sometimes I would swear I heard whispers. Being an avid believer in spirits, I wasn't particularly afraid. Until things started getting dark. One morning as I was lying in bed, watching Netflix and hoping to fall asleep, I heard a rustling from the closet. It was just light enough in the room that you could make everything out. I saw nothing and thought maybe it was just the fan. Something moved out of the corner of my eye, and as I looked at the closet, a dark ball moved from the closet to the bedroom door. It was about the size of a softball and moved about as fast as a person could to the door. Later into the week, my wife had gotten into the bad habit of sleeping with the closet light on. I blame myself for that one. Should have kept my mouth shut. So we're lying there talking about baby stuff. Women. And I noticed the curtain that covered the closet opening move. My wife was curled into me facing my chest, and I was staring at the closet. As I kept watching, I saw what I can only describe as a tiny mist-like figure, not like white mist, but slightly darker than the rest of the background, move out from the closet. It was maybe 3 feet tall and vanished as quick as it appeared. As soon as I began telling my wife what had happened, she had a sharp pinch on her back. She didn't cry out or scream. She calmly turned around and shouted, "Get the fuck out and leave us the fuck alone." Too bad it didn't work. Now, let's fast forward. You're probably wondering, what else happened? Well, small stuff here and there for a while. Footsteps were regular. And I know some of you are probably saying, "It's the house settling jackass." I would agree, but not only did the footsteps stretch out the entire length of the 20-foot hallway, they sometimes were fast. And the knocks on the doors were very rhythmic, like when you knock on a friend's door when they're home or something. So let's get to scary stuff. After this, recent Christmas things began to spark up to a new level. One day I was sitting on my computer and my wife came into the room asking me what I needed from the store. The computer room was directly across from the bathroom, our daughter's door was to the immediate left of that, and the stairs were to the right. I began telling my wife what I wanted when she looked out the door and turned, ghost white. Her eyes got big and her mouth dropped. She slowly turned toward me. I just saw a man walk into Elena's room. She begins describing what it looked like. It was about 6 feet tall, black, and only slightly translucent. While she's describing this, I walk out into the hallway and go into my daughter's room. Have you ever walked into a freezer, like the ones Walmart stocks ice cream in? That immediate chill is what I felt when I walked in there. There was nothing, of course, but as soon as we began walking out, a set of metal bed frames we had laying against the wall, for over a year I might add, slid down and fell to the floor. My wife turned back into the room and told whatever it was to get the fuck out of our home. But it didn't, of course. Come January, things really picked up before we moved out. The power got knocked out during a sudden storm and we were left in the dark for a night. My wife at this point wanted nothing to do with the home at this point and wanted to stay at her dad's. So we began packing her things for the night. I went downstairs and got my daughter loaded up in the car, and as I started walking back my wife shot out of the door nearly in tears. I asked her what was wrong and she only said simply, "I don't want to talk, close the door, let's go." The upstairs to the home is pitch fucking black even on the brightest day due to the layout. So when the power's off during overcast, you might as well be underground. My wife was in our room gathering her makeup and things with only a flashlight. As she was loading things into her bag, she heard someone walk from the stairs, down the hallway, and right up against her back. She assumed it was me, but when she turned around she saw nothing but black. Not like darkness black. Imagine someone holding a black sheet in front of you. Something like that. Even on our moving out day, things were happening upstairs. It was the worst I've personally ever felt it. Just dread and sorrow. My wife once again had something walk up on her and heard knocks on the bedroom door while she was packing. We've gone back a few times to get a thing or two since we left in February. Every time it's terrifying walking up the stairs. But I feel as if I should end this on a high note. We moved into a brand new home and it is a completely different experience here. It has helped our relationship and has taken a huge burden off of us. My scariest home alone story happened during one of the first times I was left alone as a teenager. I left alone at home on a random Sunday when my parents brought my brother to some event. I was loving the freedom and everything was going great until I decided to leave my house to see my friend. My parents specifically told me not to leave the house and I did anyways. Not thinking in the moment, I left my house and I completely forgot to lock the door. I came home hours later and I had a terrible gut feeling. Something felt weird and I noticed that cabinets were left open and stuff was scrambled around the house. I began to become very startled, but I didn't completely believe that someone was there because it was so quiet. I started shouting throughout the house to see if anybody was there. There was no answer. I started to feel better until my phone started ringing. I looked down and it was an unknown ID. Looking for attention, I answered the phone and I heard deep and heavy breathing. I started to get extremely scared. It felt straight out of a movie. I kept asking, "Who is this?" repeatedly, until the phone hung up. 2 minutes later, I got another call and I answered to the deep breathing. It sounded like an angry voice and I started to become impatient that they weren't saying anything. They hung again and I got aggravated. I got another call from the unknown ID and the breathing started again. Out of nowhere, I heard a deep and quiet voice whisper, "I'm in the house." My heart stopped and chills ran down my spine. I've never been so scared in my life, but I acted tough thinking it was a prank call from my friend or brother, knowing I was home alone. The caller hung up this time and I started to hear creaking from upstairs and suddenly I heard loud footsteps. Luckily, I heard something drop before he started sprinting downstairs. I was able to get a head start on the intruder and I disappeared into the woods and immediately called the cops. The cops reported and they found the door left wide open. They never found the person that snuck in, but I'm lucky to be able to share that wild story. My husband was having a dude's weekend and I was home alone with our kid. The downstairs neighbors were fighting, nothing new there, when all of a sudden I heard her scream, "Help me, please God, someone help me." So loud I knew she had run out the kitchen into the back stairwell. She was crying and screaming, their baby was screaming, then there were thumps and more yelling. I had already called 911 and while they were getting my information, everything went silent down there. The baby suddenly stopped, everything was quiet. I told them to hurry. The police arrived and I had to let them in the building, so much for an anonymous report. And they pounded on the downstairs door for a while with no answer. They tried calling the landlord to get permission to break down the door, but one officer came up to ask me if there was another way in. I showed them the back stairwell and said they were unlikely to have bothered locking the kitchen door. They hadn't, and the officers got in. Nobody home. They came back and asked me again what I'd heard, and another officer hung back. The family was finally found in the basement. He said they'd all been down there doing laundry and hadn't heard the police knocking. Bullshit. People down the block could hear them threatening to break down the door. We'd drawn quite a crowd. She insisted everything was fine and she and the baby were safe and sent the police on their way. Nothing they can do if she insists she's safe. I couldn't sleep all night, and they were extra cold to us after that. A few months later, I answered the door to 2 police officers responding to a report of DV. The downstairs neighbors claimed they'd heard screaming and thumps and then saw my husband jump in his car and speed away. I was home alone, still in my nightgown. They could see lots of skin and no visible marks, and my husband had been out of the country on business for 3 days. They got in trouble for the false report and moved out later that month. I hope she eventually left him. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Or, surrounded by forest. The sort of place where you wouldn't get a car unknown to you mistakenly driving into your driveway, your closest neighbors being across the field from your house, that sort of thing. Our house had 3 floors, of which the first one's backside was underground, built on a hill, so there was a staircase around the house with a door leading outside just behind my second floor bedroom window, which was at the back of the house facing the forest. Nobody rarely used the door to enter the house, as you had to walk up the stairs and behind the house in order to do so. I loved staying up late on my computer and would spend countless nights playing games and chatting with mates until the early hours. I must have been around 12. It was in the middle of summer, so it was incredibly light outside regardless of the time. My parents were on holiday and 2 of my brothers were not at home. I was about to go to sleep, but did a little round around the massive house and noticed one of my brother's door was wide open. Only then I realized I was home all by myself and of course took advantage of that rare occasion and browsed through his room. Mostly it was just super cool entering his room, as he'd often tell me to get lost. Anyway, I got tired and finally went to bed. I soon woke up to what I thought was a loud, slow, banging noise. Startled, I sat up in my bed and looked around. It was still in the middle of the night. I felt my entire body tense as I sat as still as possible, listening. Perhaps I just dreamt it all up. Then I heard it again. Right outside my window. Only it was getting louder and faster. I started panicking, remembering that I was all alone at home. Now I clearly heard someone moving outside. I gathered all of my courage and sneaked to the window, slowly getting closer to peek through the shutters. My hands were sweating and all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat growing faster in my ears. As I carefully moved the shutters aside, I saw a tall, skinny and fully naked man stood there. Outside my window. In the forest, behind our house, in the middle of fucking nowhere. I honestly don't even remember my exact reaction except for almost shitting myself, but only seconds later I heard the dude shouting, "Insert my name here, open the fucking door right now, FFS. Open the fucking door. Are you deaf? Let me in right now." I recognized that voice. It was my brother. I quickly ran to the door and peeked through the window to make sure it indeed was him before opening it. My brother had apparently managed to sleepwalk and lock himself outside but naked, only to wake up somewhere in our garden. I guess he must have felt equally terrified when waking up that night before realizing where he was or what was happening. It was pretty fucking hilarious the next day. For me at least. So one summer after all my roommates went back home, I was living alone in the college apartment complex. One night, I decided to go to the bars and then Uber home, relatively safe college town, I had done this plenty of times before, and the city is pretty empty in the summer. I stepped out of the Uber and started walking up the stairs to my apartment when two men came down at the same time. My guess is they saw me exit the ride. They approached me and started complimenting me, asking for my number and where I was going. I brushed it off, but really had nowhere else to go other than in my apartment since my car keys were in there. So when I reached the door, I was like, "Oh, my boyfriend lives here. He's inside waiting for me." And one of them said, "No, you don't have a boyfriend. We've seen you alone," which was a major red flag, like major, but I had no other choice but to just run inside. Now I know I probably should have called the cops here, but they left me alone, so I left it alone. Well, the next night I was laying on my couch, directly in front of the front door, watching TV when I start to hear the door handle rattle. I freak out and go still and silent. Then I start to hear it get a little more forceful, and it sounds like someone is pushing on the door. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, went towards the door to look through the peephole at a distance, and it was the two guys from last night. Now I'm a pretty petite female, so I knew that I was no match. The two of them started knocking really loud, yelling that I needed to open the door. I ran to the end of the hallway and called 911. They started kicking the door, and at this point I was full on shaking, just full of adrenaline, but the operator was keeping me sane. At one point the knocking and bang stopped for about 5 minutes, and I was finally able to relax, and the operator let me know the cops were at the apartment looking for the guys. About 15 minutes later there was another knock at the door, and it was the cops. They let me know that they searched the whole complex before coming over but couldn't find the two guys, but had seen similar reports of harassment and break-ins in the area from other females, and lectured me about how I should have reported it sooner. Needless to say, I went home for the rest of the summer and didn't come back until it was time to move out. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I lived alone in a little house on the gated school grounds where I worked. It should be noted that for the front half of my house, the walls were just chain link fencing attached to support pillars, the floor and ceiling. My bedroom had solid walls and a door that locked, but it was so hot, I never closed it. One night it was raining super hard, and I was just watching TV on my laptop like normal. I kept just barely hearing this weird pinging sound. I'd pause my show and listen, but not hear anything else. My house was also full of rats and bugs, so I was used to constant little noises. A few times I felt the pings as much as I'd heard them. Like the wall was vibrating slightly. Again, I'd pause my show, listen, nothing suspicious. After a while, I got ready for bed, put my laptop away, tucked my mosquito net under my mattress so I was in like a net-tight little tent, and switched to watching TV on my phone until I fell asleep. I woke up to what sounded like someone whispering my name. I sat half up. I could see the crouched shape of a person next to my bed. I reached out and touched someone's hand inside my net tent. I think I may have whispered a pretty shocked sounding "what?" and the person jumped up and ran out of the room. It happened so fast I honestly thought maybe I'd dreamed it. I got up and went to see if I'd left my front door unlocked. I thought maybe a member of my host family saw it swinging open and came in to check on me. Nope. Door locked. I thought maybe one of the chain link panels had come loose, so I started walking around my front room/porch, pushing on every one to see if it was secure. When I came to the very last panel, I saw a gaping hole. Someone had cut through it and bent the wires back so it would stay open. The pings I'd heard were wire cutters. Whoever it was, he must have been hiding in my house for hours, watching and waiting for me to fall asleep. He didn't steal anything or hurt me at all, but the moment I saw that hole in my wall is the most terrified I've ever been in my life. This isn't paranormal, but it's the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me when I was home alone. A few years ago, when I was about 14 or 15, my parents went to see a movie and left me at home. My house faces a park, and people in the park can look into our kitchen. Around 9 p.m. a guy approaches the back door of my house and knocks. Because the door is French style, I can see through the windows, and this guy is not someone I know. He asks me if he can use the phone. I tell him that we don't have one and he can try the neighbors. The guy seems to leave, walks down the porch and into the darkness, and I return to my duties on the computer. I was sitting at the table surfing the internet when this happened. To my right was this window that is around the back of the house. To access it, you need to be deliberately looking to go to this particular area of the house. I'm using the computer, minding my own business, when my dog, bless her little heart, bolts towards the window barking and snarling. You know that moment when you know exactly what's waiting for you, but you refuse to believe that it could be true? I had that. I told her, "Lucy, get away from the window." She wouldn't stop barking. Tentatively, I turned to look out the window. This guy was standing below the window, watching me. I shrieked and dove under the table, screaming for him to get the fuck away from me. The guy circled back around the house and stood on my porch outside the door. Eventually, I decided that being in his direct line of sight was a really bad idea, so I made a run for it and hid in the kitchen, and then a windowless bathroom. I sat in there for 2 hours trying to calm myself down while talking to a friend on the phone until my parents came home. I have no idea how long the guy stood there, but he was gone by the time my parents came home. To this day, I wonder what that guy wanted. I also wonder what would have happened if I let this guy into my house. Because this guy got into my yard through the park, we padlocked the fence. Even then, it took about a year for me to feel comfortable being home alone again. Even now, though, I spend most of my time upstairs or hidden from view of the park when I'm home alone at night.